Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Beat the Big Guys. I'm your host, Sandy Rosenthal, and together with my producer, Landry Bone, we bring a new episode to you every month. And this month, our guest is from the great state of New York, and his name is Jordan Chariton. Hello, Jordan.
Hey, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. I have read your book, and a couple of times I had to put it down because it was a little bit too close to home. And I felt like I'd lived part of it. And I'm so glad that you have out there doing your good work. Let me tell our listeners what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a book that's recently come out called Exposing the Flint Water Crisis Cover Up and the Poisoning of 100,000 Americans. It's called We the Poisoned. And for those of you looking at this on YouTube, I'm holding up the book cover right now. And it does have a foreword by the great Aaron Brockovich. So let me tell you just a little bit more about our guest, and then I'm going to hand the mic over to him because he's got some great ideas for those of you out there who see a problem and don't feel that they have the know-how to do anything about it. We're going to change that today. Jordan Chariton is an independent investigative reporter known for reporting on the ground on stories that the mainstream media just doesn't cover. He is CEO of Status Quo News, an indie outlet on YouTube, and I just subscribed to it. But what we're going to talk mostly about today is Jordan's new book, which was published in August 2024, and it is fresh off the press, as they call it. And I'm going to read just a little bit to you that is from the book cover. As the ongoing Flint Water Crisis marks its 10th anniversary, Chariton reveals shocking new evidence of the major government cover-up that resulted in the poisoning of Flint and shadows what you think you know about the crisis. So with that, Jordan, please take it away.
Sure. I think in our, screwed up political and media environment, people have a hard time remembering a disaster from 10 days ago, much less 10 years ago. So really, I've made it my mission for the last 8 years. I first went to Flint in 2016 to make sure that as best as I can, I keep this in the news and I make sure people know that despite the claims and the narrative from the federal government, the state government, people know that this is still very much, I don't even like the word crisis. I say disaster because people kind of become numb to the word crisis. It's used so much. But I first went to Flint in 2016. Like most people, I guess I was kind of naive and I figured it was being fixed. I just thought, well, obviously the government's going to help these people. And quickly I learned that was not obvious. So I went there in 2016 after a resident had reached out to me and told me that the media had already abandoned the people and the story and that it was not getting better. It was getting worse. The lead poisoning. I went there and very quickly I saw that not only was this just crime against humanity and the human suffering was unconscionable, but very quickly I learned that this was a major, major government scandal and that contrary to what the mainstream media reported, this was not some accident. This was not some tragedy born from, you know, just government trying to save money or cut corners. I learned that this was actually a major for-profit privatization scheme. This was a scheme to make a lot of money. And the residents of Flint, which is one of the poorest communities in America, it's a majority black community. They were basically used as guinea pigs and collateral damage to build a completely unnecessary new water system, a privatized water system. And while that new water system was being built, the government officials, some of them who were unelected, by the way, that's a part of the story that has been lost. The Republican governor of Michigan back in 2011 declared a financial emergency in Flint and a couple other communities. And as part of declaring a financial emergency, he waved a wand and appointed unelected emergency managers. I just call them czars, to take over power from the elected mayor and city council. So right now, there's so much focus and hysteria over our democracy is at stake in the election. Well, I can tell you this is actually a case study on democracy actually being removed because unelected puppets were basically put in place to take over cities. And their first order of business was to privatize the water system in Flint. And as a result of that, they built a brand new water pipeline. And I've spoken with engineers who say they've never seen anything like this in America. They built a new water pipe that was going to run the exact same path and trajectory as the existing water pipeline for which Flint had gotten its water from Detroit for 50 years. So there's no reason for this water system. Detroit had provided Flint with water from Lake Huron, which is part of the Great Lakes, some of the cleanest water in the world. But because Detroit had been raising prices to Flint for many years and price gouging, local officials, state officials used that as an excuse. Well, let's just build a new water system and privatize it. At the last minute, Detroit didn't want to lose Flint as a customer, so Detroit offered Flint nearly 50% off to stay on its system. Pretty good deal. But local officials and these unelected emergency managers, it was never about saving money. It was about privatizing the water system and making money for landowners, for banks, for investors. So they built this new pipeline. It was not going to save Flint money. It was going to cost more money. And while that new pipeline was being constructed, they said, well, we're not going to continue getting water from Detroit because we were paying $1 million to Detroit a month. We'll just use the Flint River. Well, if you don't know, the Flint River, General Motors, Dow Chemical, DuPont, a lot of other corporations had dumped their waste in the Flint River for about 100 years. If you talk to residents in Flint and you would have told them, oh, yeah, we're going to use the Flint River for your water, they would have been horrified. First time I went there, it looked green, the water, to me. So it never made sense. It's a significantly polluted river. And they said, we'll use the Flint River and the Flint Water Plant, which had basically been a skeleton for 50 years. It had not been used as a full-time plant to treat water for half a century. I compare it to these Boeing planes that are falling apart in midair. It didn't even have all the equipment needed to treat water. And in my book, I show, workers on the ground floor were screaming, hell no. And I quote, hell no, we're not ready. A year before this water switch. So it was very clear that this was a reckless decision. It was rushed, essentially because they wanted to build this new water system. And the even more shady, fraudulent part of this, around this time in the early 2010s, Flint, like many cities in America, deindustrialized cities, was broke. Legally, Flint did not even have a credit rating. It could not borrow any more money legally because it was so impoverished. Well, to build this nearly $300 million brand new water system, the politicians, they needed cities like Flint to help finance it. Well, how does a broke, nearly bankrupt city borrow $100 million for a completely unnecessary new water system? We'll just create a fake emergency. So there was this very fraudulent financial deal created with the help of J.P. Morgan and Wells Fargo, Wall Street, to allow a nearly bankrupt Flint to borrow $100 million for a completely unnecessary new water system. They cited the cleanup of some lime pit next to the water plant as an emergency. And through the back door of that agreement, they said, we'll allow Flint to borrow $100 million to help fund the construction of this new pipeline. And we know what happened after. While that was built, they used the Flint River. They used the Flint Water Plant. They did not add the proper chemicals into the water to make sure that lead and other contaminants didn't leach off. And very quickly, residents were receiving brown water. Residents were getting rashes from the water. I had residents when I went there showing me plastic bags filled with hair that had fallen out. And so that was step one, the scam leading to the poisoning. And as my book reveals, then as the residents were being poisoned, the state government with the complicity of the federal government, engineered, based on my reporting, the biggest government cover-up I know of. Watergate, no one died from. People have died from this and continue to die. That's the thing that people don't understand. This is not over. The media has framed this as some tragedy in the rearview mirror. Cancer is through the roof in Flint. Some cancers are up 300%. Residents are dying of kidney failure, liver failure. Children have significant learning disabilities, autism, regression in reading, math, you name it. Teenagers who were children when they were poisoned cannot hold down jobs. There's a surge in teen suicides. They were children when they were poisoned. So the ramifications of this are generational, and it has been swept under the rug. It has been, as I'm sure you saw in some of your research with Katrina and other things, you hear a lot of spin from the government that things are improving or things are better when it's the exact opposite.
Wow. It, this this is the story. I mean, I admit I'm one of them. The media wasn't covering it, and I broke my own rule. And one of my rules is don't look to the media for affirmation. Don't look to the media if you want to know if something's true. Don't look to the media on whether a story has merit or should be noteworthy or attention worthy just because they don't report on it. So I broke my own rule. I'm one of the ones who did think that the crisis was fixed. So thank you for bringing it to our attention that it absolutely is not. We could talk for days about this 100,000 souls who are being poisoned and what's going on with that. But I'd also, and I would like for a moment to talk about some of the things that these 100,000 people experience when trying to speak up. They tried. They did. They didn't sit there and let this happen to them. They absolutely tried to speak up. And one of the first things I read in your book is they were told when they tried to bring their attention to anyone who would listen that they were being confrontational. You're being too confrontational. And like, excuse me, my children are dying, and you think I'm being confrontational? So, so for the listeners out there, that happened to me, and I now know that I wasn't being confrontational. There was nothing wrong with my tone. They just didn't like what I was saying. That's what the
Yeah.
problem was. I didn't like what I was saying. And it's rather than say I don't want to believe you, they say, well, I don't like your tone. So Jordan, what's your response to I read it in your book that the activists who spoke up were called confrontational. What's your comment on that?
Yeah, you see it in so many of these situations. I've seen it in Flint. I've seen it in East Palestine, Ohio, where Norfolk Southern blew up those rail cars with chemicals. The government spends more time and in some cases more money controlling the narrative than they do fixing the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So in the case of Flint, I mean, they were genuinely gaslighting residents, saying, "Oh, you know, you're overreacting. The water, it's an aesthetic problem. The brown water, it's not a health problem. Oh, the rashes, that could be from anything. It's all a coincidence." Or you're being, some residents told me, they were told, don't be hysterical, or you're going to create a panic. And I learned, not to name drop, but I've gotten to know Erin Brockovich, which I'm really lucky that she wrote the forward for this book, and I've learned a lot. She's been fighting the fight much longer than I have, and I learned from her: go straight to the residents. Don't go to government officials. Don't go to experts. It doesn't mean that they always lie, but if you want the truth of what's going on the ground, you need to talk to the residents and the activists, because for the most part, they have no reason to lie. So I went to the residents, and it just was very clear to me. Frankly, if it were me, I would have been even louder. And I don't
Yeah.
blame them because
You would have been more
so
confrontational. Yeah.
right. I mean, and by the way, in my book, I expose for the residents that were confrontational. The first chapter actually reveals that one father, he was having seizures, he was losing his memory because of the water, and he went off at a town hall in Flint, it got media attention. And that's when the sirens go off
Huh.
in the governor's office. Oh no, we got to control the narrative. We got to keep up the narrative that everything's fine, everything's improving, the lead levels are going down. So 3 weeks later, that young father in Flint who was having seizures and forgetting how to drive home, um, he got a visit from the governor's right hand man in
Right.
his living room.
Right.
And the governor's right hand man had, I mean, you can't even make this up out of a movie. He had a state trooper to his left and a former Army colonel to his right, basically offering him
Looking very threatening.
medicine and
Mhm.
basically
Menacing.
offering him the sweetheart deal, which I learned was a payoff offer
Hmm.
to keep him quiet.
Hmm.
So my response is when the government harms the people they represent, whether it's intentional or it's just gross recklessness, it's not up to the residents to calm down. It's on the government to fix it. And they did not do that here. The government, I'm talking from the federal level to the state to the city, they have spent more energy and more resources to sweep it under the rug rather than to fix the problem. Imagine 10 years later, if your audience doesn't know, 10 years later, they have not replaced all of the damaged pipes in Flint. So there is still water going through severely damaged pipes where lead and other chemicals and contaminants are leaching into the water. 10 years later, they do not have criminal justice. No one is in prison. No one has even seen a jury. 10
Hmm.
years later, 10 years later, they do not have free health care. I'm talking to residents who are nearly going bankrupt because they're maxing out credit cards for specialists, for environmental doctors that are not covered by insurance. And 10 years later, the water is still bad,
Yeah.
despite what the EPA and the states say. I go there. I was just there for my book. There are residents coming up to me 10 years later, showing me rashes on their skin from the water, showing me hair still falling out. There are residents posting on social media brown water in Flint. So it is not only infuriating, but is a real scandal in America, which is supposedly the wealthiest country on earth for the few, that Americans were poisoned, and instead of fixing it, it was covered up, and frankly, they are being left to slowly die.
And when we close today, we'll advise our listeners, and in addition to buying a copy of your book, to learn about this, we can also give them ways that they can help the residents directly, and we can do that at the close of the show. So there's just a couple more things that I wanted to touch on that you talked about, and that is we've talked about uh, uh, how what that act that as an activist, and if you speak up and because you've seen a problem, you may be told, I don't like your tone, I think you're being confrontational, and we now know that's a sign you should be more confrontational and maybe up your tone a little bit, because there's nothing wrong with your tone, they just don't like what you're saying. But also another one of the things will happen when you speak up because you've seen a problem is you may be asked, well, why? Why is this happening? And I'll give you a perfect example because this absolutely happened to me. I caught the local media house, the main local paper in New Orleans, colluding with the Army Corps of Engineers to hide the truth. I caught them. Not that I suspected it, I caught them doing it. And then I was asked, well, why would they do that? So what's happened is they're hitting me with a question. I don't know why. I just know that they are. And to be hit with the question, well, why? That's just trying to throw me off or trying to throw you off. And being saddled with the burden of motive is absurd, and that's what they'll try to do. That's what they'll try to do to make you feel like your claim has no merit, even if though you've witnessed obvious evidence of this happening. But real quick, I want to mention, Jordan, that during my stint as an activist, I thought that the foreign media asked much better questions. It did much better reporting than the American media across the
Can I
board. You
can I tell you something truly shocking?
sure?
I've been to Flint 21 times since 2016.
Uh-huh.
I'd say 75% of the time when I've been there, the only other media covering it other than me is foreign outlets.
Foreign
I
outlets.
have I have been
Right.
to Flint 21 times,
Yep.
and when I am there, I have seen French outlets. I have seen Russian
German.
outlets.
Hmm.
Yeah, I
German.
have seen local, not local, foreign documentary
Hmm.
filmmakers. They're more than I have seen the local media
Hmm.
or national media, which should really tell you something.
Yeah, it should tell you something. I got this out of your book because the United States journalistic system is infuriating, and I couldn't agree with you more. On the other hand, I don't totally write them off because if you out there, if you do get media coverage, it's free and it will help you further the reach of your message. So don't write off the American media, but don't sit back and wait for them to come save you, because that's not going to happen. That doesn't mean give
And
up.
if
Yeah, okay.
And if you'll quickly allow me, I hope people know that the media is in on, like you found out,
Mm.
the media is in on these cover-ups. I can't get in every outlet's head. I can't say whether it's corruption or other reasons, but as I show in my book, there was a local outlet in Flint, local ABC, that they had proof 6 months after the water switch that there was a deadly bacterial outbreak spreading in Flint, the Legionnaire's disease,
Mhm.
which is a waterborne pneumonia and it
Right.
could kill you, and it did kill people.
Mm.
And they got documents showing that a local hospital in Flint had an outbreak of this at the same time as residents were showing up to City Hall carrying jugs of brown water at the same time that residents had rashes. You would think, oh my God, we're going to run that story immediately because we have the documents proving it. It was mysteriously killed. A reporter started reporting it, and then she got the order to stop.
Mm-hmm.
I could never nail it down for sure, but I have suspicions why that story was killed. But I can tell you, if that local station would have ran that story 6 months after the water switch, it would have saved a lot of lives because Flint residents would have known that there is a deadly bacteria in your water and they would have stopped drinking and bathing in it. So media plays a big, big part in these stories.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's because they have advertisers that advertise with their stations, or whether it's because they're being intimidated by government officials or they don't want to lose access, you have a responsibility as a journalist, particularly when it comes to life and death, to inform the public. And if you are not going to do that, then you are part of the problem.
I agree. And I was holding up the book for just a second. Thank goodness for the Jordan Charitons of the world. I wish there were more of them. But again, to our listeners, just because the media is not covering your story, it doesn't mean that your claim has no merit. No, keep going, keep going. Eventually, they're going to have to cover it. And I have examples in my book. If you keep at it, the media is going to eventually have to cover it because it'll look strange if they don't. It'll look really, really strange if they don't. Now, I have a question for you because you're a journalist. So I received a phone call very early in my activist career, and I had called out the Army Corps of Engineers. The flooding of New Orleans wasn't a monster storm; it was engineering mistakes by the federal government. So I was out there talking this up. I got a phone call. This is 20 years ago. That was back when they actually called you on the phone, and it was a major media house, a major reporter. He asked me this question. Well, Ms. Rosenthal, if what you're saying is true, why isn't your mayor and your U.S. senators screaming that information from the rooftops if what you're saying is
Hmm.
true? I mean, that could mean billions of dollars flowing into your hands. This is a journalist asked me that. So I'll tell you my reaction, and then but first I'd like to hear your response. This is a journalist asking me this question.
Oh my God. So the journalist apparently thinks that truth versus lies can only be measured whether a politician is screaming about it.
Yeah.
Uh, that person, well, I would say that person has to go back to journalism school, but unfortunately, they teach you a lot of crap there too. No, that's not how you deliberate whether it's fact versus fiction. And the fact that they're coming to you and putting the onus on you
Mm.
to prove truth or falsehood, and basically saying, well, it can't be true because your politicians aren't screaming about it. No, if that journalist was worth his or her salt, they would start investigating it, not waiting for the politician to bless it as true or not. Because I don't know if they know this, but politicians lie. for a whole lot of reasons, or politicians look the other way. I can't tell you how many times in the case of Flint, a politician, local politician in Flint or national, have known about parts of the cover up that I exposed, but remained silent for a variety of reasons, whether it had to do with their donors or didn't want to expose a
It doesn't
fellow
matter
Democrat.
why. Doesn't matter why,
Right.
but they did. But they
Yes.
did.
So it is very backwards what that journalist, their method of asking the activists, well, if it's true, why isn't the politician saying anything? That's
And I
not
was and I hope this what Mr. Chariton just said is, oh, I forgot you, Jordan.
sure.
What Jordan just said, everybody out there, is so critically important. And it's just one more reason you can't let yourself be intimidated, certainly by a journalist. And if you get asked a question like that, something's really, really wrong. What I did in my situation is, as I said, well, I'm flattered that you thought I was so important and so powerful that I could pick up the phone and call Senator Landrieu and Senator Vitter and get them on the phone and give them the truth. I no, seriously, really, I'm flattered. And then I just went back to my story. And he did stop with that. And he knew when he asked me that there was inappropriate question. But I was a newbie. Boy, if a journalist ever tried any sort of nonsense like that on me today, they would be really sorry because I'm a pro now. I've been doing this for 19 years. But you out there, you folks out there listening, a lot of you are thinking, of jumping into something new for the first time. And I wish there was a podcast like this 19 years ago for me. So that's why we're here for you today. So it's getting a little late. Jordan, is there anything else that you'd like to add for our listeners?
Yeah, I think that it is so hard nowadays. We're all so busy. You're raising kids. A lot of us have more than one job. It's really hard to keep and wrap your head around things that happened so long ago, whether it was Katrina, Flint. But I just encourage you, if you can, to read my book. The audio version, if you prefer to listen to books, is out this week because this story is not just about Flint. This is much bigger than one city. This is about how in the world, in America, can a community be harmed, be poisoned? And instead of making them whole, which you could never do because people died, people have been permanently damaged, but instead of at least trying to remedy the situation, could you actually sweep the whole thing under the rug and pretend it's all fine and dandy? And how, in the first place, could a community be poisoned when there were so many stop signs beforehand? It is very important that people know the truth in Flint because if we don't know who poisoned Flint and more importantly, why, that then this is going to happen in other places. And sadly, I'm already seeing similar instances are happening in other places. And if we don't expose and we don't wake people up to how this happened and why, again, don't think it can't come to a neighborhood near you. It might not be the water in your case. It could be air. It could be soil. It could be fracking. It could be mining. It could be the infrastructure collapsing. But if you could be in the wrong city at the wrong time and do not expect your government to come save you. So I really appreciate you having me, and I hope people could check out the book because unfortunately the mainstream media is not investigating these kind of stories. So it's up to folks like us to do so.
Is there anything our listeners can do to reach out directly to the 100,000 residents
Yeah,
to help them?
unfortunately 20,000 have left since this happened. So the population is now down to 80,000. Yeah, I mean, there are some groups there that are still doing good work. One of them that I've been in touch with and I think is very reputable, it's called Flint Rising. So they do a lot of work on the water crisis, on relief, not just water, but health. So if you want to know more, I think it's flintrising.com. And I would really encourage you, if you live nearby, reach out to some folks in Flint. You could reach out to me too, and I'll put you in contact. My email is jordanchariton@statusquo.com. And I'm sure Sandy could put that up. And I'll put you in contact. I really think, reaching out to the residents and asking them, what do you need? It might sound hopeless, but flooding your congressmen and senators and telling them this is still a disaster. Why aren't you fixing this? A little, nonviolent harassment of politicians sometimes works.
Oh, it works.
Yeah. So treat this as if it's your neighbor, even if you live thousands and thousands of miles away from Flint. Because if we don't help the people in Flint, like I said, this can happen where you live, and it's already happening. It might not be water, but in another form. So Flint Rising is one of the groups that I know, and you could reach out to me individually, and I'll put you in contact with residents.
Well, I'm going to let the listeners know right now that I'm going to be sure to put these details in writing in the program notes for the podcast. So all you have to do, if you want to get correct spelling and everything, is just go to the program notes for this show. So thank you so much, Jordan, for being with me today. Jordan Chariton.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And thank you, the listeners, for joining us. I hope you like this episode. Please rate, subscribe, and like this podcast on all of your favorite platforms. And remember, no matter who you are, you too can beat the big guys. Okay, stay with me. I'll turn this baby off.